I take this opportunity to introduce our father of PREM, we could shortly say, who has got his renowned identification as father of PREM nationally and internationally. And he's created a very big buzz through this PREM project, what Kaho has taken up. So Dr. Rahul Deshmukh is the medical director of Medcare Orthopedic and Spine Hospitals, Dubai. And his particular center is the first orthopedic center to be JCA accredited in Dubai. So apart from this, sir has developed PREM, PROM, and FMEA in his organization, which has taken up the organization with a well-built culture of quality. Over to you, sir. And we are happy to have you on board and to listen to you. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Abdul, for that kind introduction. Thank you, Dr. Gajendra. And of course, thank you, the entire Kaho team, for this wonderful opportunity to interact with everyone. Talking about PREMs in transfusion services. I am sure, or I hope most of us or every one of us is aware about PREMs, the patient-reported experience measures. We recently conducted a big national project on patient-reported experience measures. To briefly tell about what are PREMs, or patient-reported experience measures. Previously, it was looked at as just a survey method, wherein we were looking at the service excellence part of the healthcare as such, wherein we would ask patient how was our food quality and how was the overall reception and that kind of stuff. Recently, what had shifted or what had changed is we have introduced PREMs into clinical services, wherein we establish whether our own team members are following the protocols and processes that are there in place in our policies. Most of the times what used to happen, or what still happens, is most of these policies are there in our computers, in our systems, but on ground, in reality, those processes, policies and protocols are not followed by our team members for various reasons. It's not, nobody does it intentionally. Most common reason being shortage of staff, as even in the previous panel discussion, it was being discussed. That's probably the biggest challenge that we all face in healthcare, wherein there is not enough staff available to conduct all those policies and protocols. And from that point of view, it is important that we involve our patients as quality champions, and we ask the patients themselves that whether these policies or protocols A, B, and C, whatever were the steps to be taken in that particular process, were taken by our staff. That is what PREMs is, or patient-reported experience measures is. And today I'll be talking about PREMs in transfusion services. Now let's look at the load. When you look at the amount of transfusion that takes place globally, it's about 120 million units per year. That's the kind of load that we are talking about. Europe itself has about 25 million units, and about 12 million units per year are transfused in India. Interestingly, about 77% of our blood banks are attached to hospitals, and 23% of blood banks are standalone units, which means out of 1 out of 4 blood bank, around 1 out of 4 blood bank is outside the hospital. So blood is being brought from the blood bank to the hospital. So it's not in-house, or it's not under one roof. So there are challenges related to that as well. Integrity of blood is probably the biggest challenge that we need to consider here. Now, what are the problems? As per WHO, if we refer to the famous statement or famous document that has been released by WHO about patient safety, blood transfusion is one of the top 10 common sources of patient harm. And this is avoidable harm that we're talking about. Incidence of serious transfusion-associated reaction is about 12.2 per 100,000 or per 1 lakh units distributed. And mind you, this is data only from 60 countries which have national hemovigilance systems established. So there are still a lot of countries, about 140 countries, which do not have the hemovigilance system in place. So this figure could be misleading figure. It could be much higher than what it currently says, at about 12.2 per 100,000. Let's look at the basic process of transfusion. It's very important that when we look at any process, to keep it very simple. Let's not complicate matters further. We already have enough workload for our staff members. So let's not look at, let's not complicate the matter. Let's keep it simple. Basically, we are looking at one recipient and one donor. This is what we will be talking about. So what are the processes from a recipient point of view? Basically, identify the correct patient. This is what our staff is expected to do. Who is the recipient? Are we transfusing blood to the correct patient? That's the first and basic, most important question. Second one is collect samples and label them. So whenever we are sending blood for grouping and cross-matching, it is important that we collect the samples and label them right away, so that there is no miscommunication or there are no chances of common mistakes. Process those samples in the blood bank and then transfuse the right product to the right patient at the right time. This is all about, from a recipient's point of view, this is what needs to be done. If you look at it from a patient's point of view, this is what needs to be done. We should be identifying the patient correctly, labeling the samples correctly. Then the process happens in the blood bank. Once the blood or blood product comes to the patient, we need to ensure that we are transfusing the right product to the right patient at the right time. That's very basic of blood transfusion. I know attendees here must be all veterans in blood transfusion services. So it may sound very basic, but from a patient's point of view, this is what it is. So recipient safety, first and foremost, again, as we said, first we need to identify the correct patient. IPSG, everyone knows about it. We need to identify with two identifiers. But before that, are we explaining about the need of transfusion? Does the patient really need transfusion? And is it being communicated to the patient that this is why we need to transfuse you? That's the first and foremost question. So this is how our PREM tool can also be developed about transfusion, that whether you were told or we were explained about the need for transfusion. Secondly, was the patient educated about what to expect during transfusion? Once we have communicated that you need blood transfusion, it is very important that we also explain to the patient what exactly will happen during transfusion. The entire process needs to be explained to the patient. Patient education about side effects of transfusion, another very common thing or another very important thing. Obviously, it involves the consent for transfusion as well, but it's not about just signing that paper of consent. It's important that we explain to the patient and the family what are the side effects that are to be expected out of this transfusion. Obviously, history and physical examination, such as comorbidities, previous transfusions, whether any of our team members have taken this part into consideration. Have we considered his or her comorbidities, and whether the patient has received any transfusions before this? That's another important thing. Obviously, whether our team members used two identifiers. Again, IPSG basic thing, but it's very important that we check with the patient whether two identifiers were used to identify the right patient. So this is how anyone can develop the PREM tool for your own institute. You just need to go through the basic process of blood transfusion and then ask the patients whether these processes were followed. Next one, as we said, the basic steps of transfusion, labeling of samples. It is absolutely essential or critical that correct labeling before leaving the bedside. Once the nurse has collected blood or once the phlebotomist has collected blood, it is absolutely essential or critical that the labels are put on those blood samples immediately in front of the patient, in presence of patient. It can't be done at a nursing station. It needs to be done at the patient bedside. And that's what is, again, we can check with the use of PREMs, whether it is happening in reality or nurses are putting it, or the phlebotomist is putting it, or collection sample collector is putting it not in front of patient and somewhere else. During the actual act of transfusion, two team members to verify correct patient and correct unit. Again, absolute basic step, but we should be checking it with our patients whether these basic steps are being followed. And regular monitoring of patient during transfusion. These are the basic steps of transfusion, and this is what we can or we should be checking with our patients whether all these steps are followed. If all these steps are followed, this will ensure patient safety and the recipient safety per se. That was about the recipient. Donor safety. I'm not sure how many of us are aware, but donor safety, the frames for donor safety have already been developed by CAHO itself. So it will be like reinventing the wheel if we are looking at developing another frames for donor safety. It is easily available and it is part of our white paper that was released by CAHO recently. You can refer to this from this link as well, or you can just Google and find out on the CAHO white paper. Donor safety PREMs is already available there, so no point in spending another time, everybody's precious time in this. But this is already available with the in our white paper. These are my references, and thank you for your time.